Well, good afternoon to those of you in Europe, and good morning to those of you in the States. Welcome to our webinar titled 12 Data Implementations Lessons Learned. I'm Don Bridges with Data Conversion Laboratory. I'll be your moderator today. We have two speakers today. Mark Gross is the founder of Data Conversion Laboratory and is a recognized authority on automated data conversion. The results that are being presented today were collected by Mark and myself this past autumn. We also have Naz Urbina, a senior consultant from Mekon Limited and chairperson of Congility.com, formerly Xpubs.com. Naz is going to be going through an actual case study which shows some best practices for implementation. The presentation will last about 45 minutes, and we'll have time for questions after. If you have questions at any time, you may submit them by clicking on the Questions tab. If there's any question that we don't get to by the end of the program, we will send responses out later. Also, this program is being recorded and will be posted online. Should you want to look at it again, I'll forward it to a colleague. And if you think of a question afterwards, you can always send it to us. Our contact information will be on the very last slide. Or you can ask us in person, as both DCL and Mekon will be at DITA Europe, November 15th and 16th in Vienna. And now let me turn the program over to Mark Gross.
Hi, this is Mark Gross speaking from a cold, dank New York City today. Thank you for joining us. So the presentation is about a study we did of 12 actual data implementations that Don and I did so far. And you have to realize studies is not what we normally do. What DCL does is convert documents to XML. So that's really our business, and including dozens of conversions to DITA. The study itself came out of a discussion I had with a colleague as to the order in which people really implement these new data systems that they're putting up. Specifically was whether they pilot and convert first or whether they select their CMSs first, or just the general order in which things happen. And we decided to ask a number of our clients what they were doing, and it turns out the answers were not so intuitive. And so we expanded that a little bit and asked a few more questions, and in the process learned a lot more. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about the goals of the study and what we were trying to accomplish, a little bit about the study design, and then go through, spend most of the time on the key findings, which I think many were counterintuitive, at least to me. And then a little bit on recommendations for going forward. The goals of the study were to validate the obvious truths about how people implement systems, and the quotes here on obvious truths is there on purpose. Talk about what the business drivers were. Why did people go into DITA? How long did it take them? What did they learn in the process? And I think most importantly, what would they have done differently if they had it to do all over again? The way we did it, our methodology, and I have to say it wasn't a totally scientific methodology, again because we're not in the study business, was we did in-depth post-implementation interviews. That means that we spent a significant amount of time with each of these 12 companies. There's actually a few more that we're still in the process of talking to. And these are all people who had already implemented, were very far along. Either they were completely done or they were already using the systems. We promised anonymity so that people could speak a little more freely, and actually were very candid with us, I found. We focused on what was really done rather than what they thought they would do or how they would, what the theory was. We really pressed them on, so what really happened. We then corroborated our data with some industry studies and some industry experts. And I have to say this is still a work in process. As I mentioned, we still have a few more interviews that we're going to be doing, and really want to collect the information more formally. And finally, the initial focus was on DITA, but I think we found that many of the results seemed pretty general and would apply to other kinds of systems. So here's some of the results of what we found. Average time of implementation was about 3 years. This is the one that gets people, when I'm speaking to people live, I can see the eyebrows raise at this point. So some did it as little as 2 years. Very few, nobody did it really in less than 2 years when you counted everything. You know, it was like, no, it took us a year, but then when you counted when did it really start and when did you get your reviews in and when did you do the pilot, it really came out to longer than most people thought. So 3 years seemed to be about average. A few people took a lot longer, as much as 5 years, mostly because they stopped in the middle or had to come back to it. And just about everybody we spoke to, actually, it's still a work in. Nobody feels they're done. It's a work in process. They're live, they're working, but they still have things to do. The question on when was a content management system, a CMS, selected, which started this whole thing going, it was really split. I would have thought people. I originally thought that people would select their content management system early in the process. Turns out that's not what happened. About half selected it really at the beginning. The other half did it sometime in their pilots or a little bit after. So the ones who selected it later made a decision. They really wanted to get a handle on their data, how it worked. They worked with something much simpler. They worked with some kind of file system. They got their DITA working. And then once they got that, they felt they had a better handle on what their true requirements were. There were two companies in the pile that actually made a selection early on and then switched it in mid-course. Sometimes, usually, I think both of them were right after the pilot when they decided that what they originally selected was not going to be suitable. And I just listed over here the main phases, and it's not necessarily in order, because obviously selecting a CMS, I originally thought was the beginning. It really goes someplace later, and some of these other steps go in different places. But I just wanted to put it down there so people see what I was thinking. What were the business drivers? Well, and this goes back to what were they thinking when they were doing their return on investment ROI analysis. The three top runners of what people said was multi-purposing of content and a reduced need for composition, content reuse and minimalism, and by that I mean that they would be able to use their modules and topics and be able to use it in many different places, as opposed to multi-purposing, which means I can use the same content but display it in different ways. I can print a book, or I can produce an HTML file, or I can put it out on a web screen someplace. And the third area was reducing translation costs, which is a really big number for many companies. And just in the results of what really happened and where they were at this point in their system life, multi-purposing was the big winner. That's what everybody reported as what they were seeing the big savings on. They were able to produce PDFs and prints from the DITA files that they had produced. They were able to go out on the web with it, HTML distribution. I love this quote over here from one of our customers. It's great for the HTML guy. He could just pump it out. And the reason is that you don't have to do very much composition when you go out to the web most of the time. You really can just pump it out. So it can go right out of a DITA system. They were using that same data to produce help systems. They were able to mix and match documents. So they were able to take pieces of documents and then reorganize them and produce a new document. They were able to brand documents for a partner. That came up from a few of the people I spoke to. They had one manual, but they were producing a piece of equipment that was being distributed or sold by other people. They were able to just insert some particulars some particulars about the equipment right into the manual, so it looked like a custom manual. There were a few who did need fine composition found it useful, or at least one person did. They would take the output of their DITA system and move it into InDesign, and they were able to produce fine, nicely organized documents as a result. And most reported a lot less print. A few people didn't, but most people reported they were at least 30 or 40% less print after they did this, primarily because they were able to get information out online much quicker than before. Content reuse, which was on everybody's hit list, everybody had it as part of their return on investment when they were selling the system internally. But it turns out that of the 12 companies we spoke to, only 2 companies were actively using content reuse, which was a surprise to me. The rest, all of the rest have this as a future development. It's on the agenda, but it's not there yet. 2 companies in the sample, the 2 companies that actually were actively using content reuse, had it as it was really they really went backwards, and they rewrote a lot of the content before they went forward. And those are the people who actually got it in advance. The other people are going to go do it after the fact. The other half. So why didn't everybody use? Why was it not being used that much? Well, it seems, and this is a little bit of my wording over here. It seems it was too big to handle. At the same time, they were trying to go into a new system to be able to go, and they felt it needed a lot of rewriting. It was just too much to do at once. They had concerns about changes propagating through the approval process. So if you already had, already have 20 manuals, this is mostly people who were in industries that were regulated. If you already had a manual done and now you can't just go willy-nilly go and change something in it, you have to go and get it reapproved. So that was going to be a concern, which is a real concern. The largest issue, and this is why I think it's just going to take more time, is that writers need to change attitudes. Traditionally, writing is a very individual activity. And reuse requires a lot more collaboration. It's no longer one writer owning each manual, which seems to be the way it is in many companies, but rather they have to be able to work together and be able to go to central databases, and that's something that's going to need a little bit of adjustment. And just the idea of writing in modules that are self-contained is a difficult transition. It's not so easy because most of the time you're used to saying, well, this is what happens above and this is what happens in the next chapter. And there's always the issue of who's really responsible for the reusable chunks. So who becomes the chunk master for the new parts? Language translation, which was certainly key in everybody's ROI. It turns out that so far only 4 of the companies are actively using translation. In terms of now for our listeners in Europe, this may be surprising, and I have to say this is a skewed sample because 9 out of the 12 companies we talked to were U.S. companies, so this may be skewed. But the 4 companies that are actively using DITA with translation all report major savings. All are using translation memory. And they're doing it without content reuse at this point because just the idea of having topics together led to savings. Reuse is really a secondary thing. If they were using content reuse at a high level, they expect more savings, but they're getting the bulk of it now. The other companies didn't have yet a need for, and again, this might be skewed, even with globalization, most of them seem to be able to get away without translation for the time being. Most of them see it, all of them see it as a future requirement, so that's probably not going to last for long. So I thought this was interesting because there's an article that appeared that Joe and Hakos had written this year called Predicting Cost Savings, in which she lays out the levels of implementation in DITA systems, actually in all systems, not just DITA. And level 1 is to, the level 1 goal is to replace desktop publishing. The level 2 is a basic content reuse strategy. Level 3 is really a very sophisticated content reuse strategy. And level 4 is more of a cost reduction strategy. What we found, and I confirmed this with Joanne when I discussed this with her, is that most people are really at level 1. Some are sneaking a little bit into level 2. And level 1 is already a pretty major savings and a major accomplishment for most, which again, this was counterintuitive to me. Some of the other issues we found, and this was one of the questions was getting people to adapt a difficult thing. Is it an issue?